June 17, 1865. Between the forks of the Platte River at first light, our scouts sighted movement on the distant ridge. Through the field glass I observed riders painted in bands of white and crimson, their horses marked in the same fashion. They moved without formation yet, with remarkable coordination, circling the column as the wagons advanced. The men reported hearing thunder, though the sky remained clear. No smoke, no cloud, only the sound. Field log of Lieutenant Samuel R. Givens, Fort Laramie Detachment Entry, number 23, U.S. Army Archives. That first entry is brief, mechanical, and without speculation. It records what was seen, nothing more. Yet in the margins faint pencil notes appear later, likely written after the initial report. They bore no flag. They made no demand. They appeared, then vanished. Another document stored in the same Fort Laramie archive box expands the event. By order of Colonel Moonlight, it reads a freight train of 24 wagons departed Fort Laramie on June 12th, bound west for Deer Creek Station. Cargo munitions, dry rations, telegraph wire, timber. Escort Sergeant Keene, 10 privates, 2 civilian guides. Weather clear, moderate winds. Objective supplied support for telegraph line extension. Communication expected within 5 days. No such communication ever arrived. The next record comes not from an officer, but from a soldier's personal diary, discovered among a collection of effects sent to his family in Ohio decades later. The handwriting is tight, hurried, and smudged with what archivists believe to be rain. The morning was too still, Sergeant Matthew Keene wrote. No bird calls, no wind in the grass. The oxen shifted as if listening. Then from the rise ahead, movement fast, deliberate. Not a charge, not a march, more like a gathering. Horses streaked with paint white across the muzzle, red down the sides. Men with faces half covered in clay. One raised a lance wrapped in cloth. Another carried a rod with feathers. I ordered the men to stand ready, but hold fire. They vanished behind the ridge and did not return. 3 days later, a report from Captain William Crawford reached Fort Laramie. His detachment had been sent to investigate the missing convoy. What they found was cataloged as irregular hostile activity. His memorandum filed June 21, 1865 reads, "The train located 9 miles west of the Platte Fork. All wagons destroyed by fire. Metal cargo melted. Flour barrels split open. No human remains located. Hoof prints in circular pattern around the debris. Traces of pigment red mixed with grease on charred wagon wood." Crawford added a final observation. Detached but telling, the pattern of movement indicates discipline uncommon among raiding parties. The absence of looting or body retrieval is irregular. Cause of disappearance of personnel remains unknown. The fort's medical log adds one of the few surviving eyewitness accounts. On June 23rd, 2 soldiers were brought in alive. Private Samuel Myers and a civilian guide identified as Robert G. Thorne. The record lists their condition as exhausted, partially burned, incoherent. The medical officer's notes are clinical. Myers reports that the attack came from both flanks simultaneously, states that horses appeared from behind a ridge and from the riverbed at once. Describes attackers as mounted faces, painted horses decorated with handprints. Fire spread rapidly through wagon line. Myers claims hearing no gunfire from attackers. When visibility returned, wagons ablaze, remainder of escort missing. Further questioning impossible due to delirium. Thorne did not recover consciousness. He died on June 24th. A telegram sent that same week to the Department of the Platte summarized the event in standard military phrasing: convoy lost. Cause hostiles. Description: mounted unconfirmed tribal composition. Recommendation: increased escort for future operations. But Givens's personal draft, preserved in his own hand, differs. It includes a passage omitted from the official transmission. "I do not believe this was a simple raid. No evidence of theft. Supplies burned rather than taken. Animals released, not captured. Markings on the ground appear deliberate, perhaps ceremonial. The attack ended as suddenly as it began. The riders departed in silence, leaving only the circle of prints. I refrain from speculation, but the men are unsettled. Several refuse further patrol duty. I have retained this record privately in the event the matter is suppressed." Over the following days, correspondence between Fort Laramie and Fort Kearny continued to reference painted horsemen sighted along the northern route. Each report described similar tactics: fast approach, encirclement, destruction of supplies, and sudden withdrawal. In no instance were bodies recovered either of the attackers or their victims. A single page remains from Givens's final entry for June. The handwriting is steadier, as though dictated after reflection. "We have buried the remains of the wagons at the confluence of the Platte Forks. The ground there is blackened. I have ordered no further investigation until reinforcements arrive. The incident has unsettled the men. I have burned my first draft of the incident report. This copy, more accurate, will remain sealed. In the decades that followed, the incident faded into obscurity, cited only briefly in military correspondences concerning telegraph expansion delays. But the tone of the documents, measured factual, never speculative, suggests the writers were aware that they were recording something beyond routine hostility. The collection of logs, letters, telegrams, and field notes, now catalogued as the Platte River Incident File, 1865, stands as the sole official record of the event. Nowhere in these documents appears any embellishment, only a consistent description of the same phenomenon, riders marked in white and red, striking supply columns west of Fort Laramie, then vanishing without trace. Each account ends the same way: no conclusion, no pursuit, no closure, only the sentence repeated across multiple reports: riders observed, identity unknown. And with that line, the file begins. The story of the painted riders begins not in memory or legend, but in the quiet endurance of paper-old brittle pages that have outlived the men who wrote them. What remains of the summer of 1865 lies scattered through 5 collections, 5 fragments of the same event recorded by different hands across the Great Plains. Together they form what historians now call the Platte River Incident File, a network of field reports, telegrams, diaries, and medical logs, each written in the same month within the same few miles of open land, where a wagon train vanished and where thunder was heard under a clear sky. The first of these records, and the most complete, is the field log of Lieutenant Samuel R. Givens. He was 31 years old, a career officer of the 11th Kansas Cavalry assigned to Fort Laramie, just as the Civil War ended and the western frontier began to shift under new orders. His ledger marked daily record, Platte Sector Operations, was discovered in 1958, hidden in a crate mislabeled Telegraph Supplies. The cover is singed, the edges of its pages blackened, as though the notebook itself had witnessed the same fire it describes. Each line is precise, factual, written with a soldier's restraint. The handwriting remains steady until June of 1865, then trails into uneven lines as if the writer's discipline began to crack beneath the strain of events. The National Archives later recovered the book, restored it, and sealed it within Record Group 94, Box 402B, where it remains to this day. The second record comes from the telegraph lines that stretched across the plains like thin veins of authority, binding forts and outposts into a fragile network of communication. These are the official dispatches and telegrams exchanged between Fort Laramie, Fort Kearny, and the Department of the Platte during June and July of that year. Typed in concise language on translucent carbon paper, the messages carry the same structure, the same rhythm: short military devoid of speculation. Convoy delayed, riders sighted, hostiles painted. The words passed down the wire like heartbeat signals, relayed from one post to the next. When historians unspooled the rolls decades later, the paper was perforated by telegraph pins and darkened by oxidation, yet the phrases remained legible. Identical reports from 3 different officers, all describing mounted horsemen marked in pigment and a convoy destroyed without trace. What these telegrams reveal is not chaos, but administrative confusion, the attempt of a bureaucracy to record what it could not categorize. They were transferred to federal custody in the 1930s, microfilmed under serial M157, and for years misfiled under transportation disruptions. Only in 1959 did archivists realize that all referred to the same incident described by Givens. The third voice is more human, less procedural. The private diary of Sergeant Matthew Keene, one of Givens' escorts on the Platte route. His diary, donated to the Ohio Historical Society in 1924 by his descendants, had long been considered routine frontier writing until researchers found the entry, dated June 17th. It reads, "The morning was still, no bird, no wind. Then dust rose, and I saw them horses painted white men with faces streaked in red. No shots, no sound, only the wagons burning before our eyes. The handwriting is hurried, uneven, as if written between bursts of movement." Forensic comparison in 1978 confirmed that Keene's account aligned line for line with Givens' log, 2 separate men separated by rank and duty, describing the same phenomenon from 2 points of observation. Their testimonies, when placed together, reveal not contradiction, but complement: one written by command, one written by endurance. The fourth document, known as the Crawford Memorandum, is brief, almost clinical. Captain William Crawford filed it on June 21, 1865, 4 days after the attack. For decades, it lay buried among engineering blueprints, unnoticed until 1975, when a graduate researcher cataloging survey notes found the phrase, "Irregular hostile activity Platte sector." It is only 1 page long, but every line is measured. Pigment traces observed on wagon frames. Debris consistent with fire accelerated by oil, hoof patterns circular, remains absent. Crawford's conclusion is restrained. hostile composition unconfirmed, supplies destroyed, not seized. The memorandum was not written to persuade. It was a procedural update for superior officers, yet it became the first official document to acknowledge that something occurred along the Platte that did not conform to standard frontier conflict. It was also the first to use a phrase that has appeared in every subsequent record absence of remains. The fifth and final component of the file lies not in a command post, but in the quiet records of a field hospital. Fort Laramie Medical Log number 112A begins with routine entries, cases of dysentery sunstroke, and minor injury. Then, under the date June 23rd, the handwriting of Army physician Dr. Edward Lang shifts tone. 2 patients admitted from the West. Private Samuel Myers semi-conscious, extensive burns. Civilian guide Robert Thorne, unresponsive, likely fatal exposure. Lang's notes read, patient incoherent, refers to painted horses, reports fire spreading from both flanks simultaneously, unable to confirm attacker's identity. On the margin, a faint pencil annotation added later by another hand said others taken not killed. The following page resumes normal entries as if the incident had already been absorbed by the paperwork of routine care. Lang's log remained in the Surgeon General's archives, bound with the rest of the 1865 records, and survives intact under Record Group 112. When viewed separately, these documents seem like administrative fragments, unrelated notations scattered by time. But when read together, they form a single unbroken timeline. Gibbons's ledger records the event as it unfolded. The telegrams show the panic spreading through the command chain. Keene's diary offers the ground-level witness. Crawford's memorandum translates shock into procedure. And Lang's medical log closes the episode in silence. 5 records, 5 perspectives, one sequence that begins and ends within the same 2 weeks of June 1865. No folklore, no interpretation, only the steady rhythm of paperwork, trying to contain an event that defied explanation. By the time these materials were consolidated into a single archival file, the Platte River incident nearly a century had passed. The historian responsible, Dr. Ellen Schoch Whitford of the University of Kansas, stumbled upon Gibbons's ledger while researching telegraph contracts. Her curiosity led her through cross-references, microfilm, and catalog entries until she found parallels too precise to ignore. Her 1961 report in the Midwestern Historical Review described how separate bureaucratic traces converged into one unacknowledged frontier encounter. It was not discovery by rumor, it was discovery by pattern. Whitford observed that the same words recurred across all sources painted: silent, circle, absence. Words written by different men unaware of one another, describing what seemed to move faster than the record itself. Each document has since been verified through conservation and cataloging. Gibbons's ledger underwent chemical stabilization in 1964. Keene's diary was digitized in 1978. Crawford's memorandum authenticated by ink analysis in 1975. Lang's medical log microfilmed and sealed in 1982. None were rewritten, none translated, only preserved. The handwriting still visible under glass remains the final witness. The geography of these records defines the event's scale. The corridor between Fort Laramie and Deer Creek Station, roughly 80 miles of open grassland, cut by the Platte River, formed part of the Oregon Trail, a channel of wagons, telegraph lines, and supply convoys stretching westward from the Missouri frontier. The Army called it the Platte Sector, a zone of constant motion, settlers moving west, soldiers patrolling east, surveyors marking boundaries that shifted with each treaty. In June 1865, it was also the line where expansion and resistance met in silence. The records themselves, factual and bureaucratic, stand as the only surviving trace of that intersection. The men who wrote them did not intend to leave behind mystery. They intended to maintain order. Gibbons recorded his duty, Keene his endurance, Crawford his accountability, Lang his obligation to document the living and the dead. Yet together their language builds an unplanned narrative, one of interruption, disappearance, and the limits of documentation. They speak with no emotion, but within their restraint is a kind of echo. The echo of what could not be fully stated in reports, yet could not be ignored either. What remains today is not testimony, but residue-burned paper, fading ink, a handful of names written between military abbreviations. They are the last administrative shadows of an encounter that history itself forgot to classify. And as the documents close, as the reports cease, the record falls silent, but the date remains fixed, unmovable. June 1865, the Great Plains. When the painted riders struck back and the written word struggled to keep pace with the event itself. The earliest surviving document in the Platte River incident file begins without ceremony, without narrative, without any sign that what followed would enter the margins of history. It is the field log of Lieutenant Samuel R. Givens, written at Fort Laramie in June of 1865. A brown leather-bound ledger ink faded its edges darkened, as if it had once been close to flame. His handwriting moves with the precision of habit letters, compact slanted forward as though always marching ahead. The entry for June 10th reads simply, issued orders at sunrise to prepare 24 wagons for departure. Cargo munitions, flour, telegraph cable, and timber. Escort detail 1 Sergeant 10, enlisted men 2 civilian guides. Departure scheduled June 12th, weather clear, dry wind. Horses in fair condition. There is no hint of apprehension in his tone, only the steady cadence of a soldier recording routine. He writes again on June 13th, delay due to broken axle. Blacksmith from Company B assisted repairs. Evening clouds forming over ridge, possible rain. It is the voice of duty, efficient, factual, uninterested in interpretation. For 3 days the log continues in this rhythm. A pattern of movement across the open plains, supply counts, distances, and short comments about weather. Yet on June 16th, a change occurs, small but visible between the lines. The report shortens as though the writer hesitates. Men report distant movement along northern ridge after sunset, possibly buffalo herd. No sound of thunder. Observation continues. The tone has not shifted in form, but in density. There is weight behind the words, and the rhythm of the sentences becomes sharper, more controlled, as if the act of writing itself is a method of command. The next day, June 17th, his entry begins with coordinates, then moves into description. Between the forks of the Platte, scouts sighted movement at dawn. Dust rising on horizon direction east to west. Through glass observed mounted riders, painted white and crimson horses similarly marked. No visible firearms. Estimated distance 1 mile. Scouts ordered to maintain position. Beneath the last line in pencil and lighter hand, a note added later, they bore no flag, they made no demand. They appeared, then vanished. The handwriting grows smaller near the edge of the page, as if space itself began to narrow. The ink ends mid-stroke, not from exhaustion, but from conclusion. The next document, written in rough cursive by Sergeant Matthew Keene, echoes Givens's tone, but bears the texture of the march itself. His diary opens with the same structure of days and distances. June 12th. Left the fort at dawn. Good road, fine air. Men cheerful. June 13th. Wheels broke at ford. Took half day to free them. Then in later pages, the tone fractures. June 15th. Past Cottonwood Bend. Found ashes not from campfire. Men uneasy, lieutenant calm. The following line moves from observation to impression. Evening quiet, too quiet, no birds, no insects, skywide, and watching. On June 17th, he writes more, a full paragraph unlike any before. The sun red at rise, the air heavy, oxen restless. About mid-morning dust lifted like smoke. Not wagons, not soldiers. Horses many white streaks on their sides, red along the shoulders. Faces painted same. They came fast, then slowed, circling far off. No sound. The lieutenant held his glass, said nothing. They turned, vanished into haze. By afternoon, the tone of the writing changes again, faster, blurred, the words pressed into the paper, as if written against movement. Wind came from the south, hard, strange smell like iron. Dust everywhere. Could not see the ridge. The light changed, sun, still up, but air turned dark. Heard a crack, not thunder, maybe wood breaking, maybe the wagon. Then fire. Saw a horse, white as bone, handprints on its flank. Heard someone shout to cut the mules loose. Could not see who. Fire spread faster than wind. Smoke so thick I could not breathe. The last visible line broken by a smear of water. When I woke, the wagons were gone. The rest of the page is torn. Captain William Crawford's memorandum follows, next typewritten, dated June 21st, filed 4 days after the event. It bears the official seal of the Department of the Platte, and its language is as dry as dust. Arrived at reported site of supply convoy. Observed fire damage over 100 yards. Wagon frames destroyed, cargo unsalvageable. Detected traces of red pigment mixed with oil on charred surfaces. Hoof impressions arranged in circular pattern. No bodies recovered. No weapon fragments. No indication of looting. In the lower margin, he adds in handwriting, possible hostile strength, 30 to 50 mounted personnel. Tribal identity uncertain. Destruction of property appears deliberate but lacks motive of theft. Further investigation required. Beneath his signature, he writes again, smaller, hesitant, filed, incomplete, awaiting testimony from survivors. That testimony appears next in the Fort Laramie Medical Log number 112A, written by the post surgeon Dr. Edward Lang on June 23rd. 2 men brought from west by patrol detachment, he records. Private Samuel Myers, 11th Kansas Cavalry. Robert Thorne, civilian guide. Both suffer burns and exposure. Myers partially conscious. Thorne unresponsive. The next paragraph quotes Myers directly. They came from both sides, from the ridge and the river, like they were two sets but one. Horses marked white, faces red, no guns, only fire. Fire came fast, spread before they reached us. They rode through it. Lang's own notation continues. Patient incoherent repeats phrase, painted men multiple times. Mentions fire without visible source. Died 0400 June 24th. The report for Thorne reads, unconscious at arrival, no recovery, buried per standard procedure. A final addition by Givens closes the early portion of the record. Dated July 2nd, his tone is resigned. Returned to site with Captain Crawford. Found ground burned and wagon fragments scattered. Located one horse tied to dead tree eyes marked black nostrils cut. Animal euthanized. No further signs of hostiles. Filed report to Department Command. No reply received. After that, the handwriting ceases. When these writings are read together, Givens's discipline, Keene's exhaustion, Crawford's formality, Lang's precision, they form a single progression, one voice blending into the next, each man documenting from within his duty, each unaware that his words would someday complete the others. Givens establishes order, Keene breaks it, Crawford verifies, Lang closes it. None of them interpret, all of them describe. Their words align by coincidence rather than intent, and that alignment forms the record's strength. There is no embellishment here, only the machinery of bureaucracy, recording what it sees and cannot categorize. Each report narrows the frame from the open sky of the convoy to the ash-colored ground of the aftermath, from sight to memory to silence. The documents do not contradict, they converge. They share the same phrases, the same stillness between events. Each mentions the color white and red, the same number of riders, 30, perhaps 50. The same absence of sound before destruction, and the same conclusion, no remains, no pursuit, no answers. By early July, the Department of the Platte had filed the event under routine loss, supply train destroyed, hostile activity. No further inquiry followed. In August, telegraph reports show the road reopened, guarded by a larger escort. Givens's name appears one more time in payroll records for September 1865, then vanishes from correspondence. Keene's diary ends mid-year. No further entries were ever found. The file does not speak of closure, only conclusion, the mechanical ending of a report without an explanation to fill its silence. The earliest records of when the painted riders struck back survive, as this unadorned sentences of men who wrote to fulfill procedure, not to create story, and yet by doing so, left one. Their words, held between the folds of official paper, preserve the moment the Great Plains changed from an open road to a ledger entry, from an event witnessed to an event recorded, from movement to evidence. Each page stands now as both document and absence, the first layer of a history that would later echo through every dispatch, every retelling, every silence that followed. As the first reports from Fort Laramie were filed and sealed, other accounts began to emerge, not in direct response, but as fragments echoing outward from the same event. Letters, telegraphs, and testimonies written in separate towns began to form a network of contradictions, each reflecting a different angle of June 1865. Together they reveal a widening uncertainty, a series of voices describing the same silence through different vocabularies. From Fort Kearny came the earliest secondary report, dated June 25th. Captain Alfred G. Tinker, quartermaster officer, writing to the Department of the Platte. His tone is formal, his phrasing tight, but between the measured words there is unease. Received telegraph from Fort Laramie noting delayed supply train, he writes. No response from Captain Crawford's detail. Smoke seen along Western Ridge. Scouts found scattered cargo wagon debris and ox carcasses stripped of hide. Pigment observed on brush white over red, forming irregular lines. A single marginal note appears in smaller ink, reports of riders painting themselves before movement. Uncertain whether ritual or preparation. No pursuit possible due to weather and terrain. Tinker's observation bridges administrative procedure and rumor, halfway between explanation and guesswork. 2 days later, a telegram from Colonel Henry Moonlight, commander of the Department of the Platte, arrived in Washington. Its message is curt. The type faint, almost mechanical convoy destroyed near Platte Forks. Believed Sioux attack. Motive unclear. Recommend increased patrols. Yet the retained carbon copy includes an addition in handwriting marked only with the initials H.M. Men describe paint pattern reversed white over red, not red over white. Behavior inconsistent with Sioux or Cheyenne tactics. Uncertain identification. That sentence never left the department. It exists only in the local copy, a moment of hesitation buried in administrative paper. In July, a letter arrived from Reverend James Whiting, stationed at the Cheyenne Agency south of the Platte. His correspondence written to the American Board of Missions carries the cadence of a man observing from the margin of two worlds. The Cheyenne deny involvement in the destruction of the supply wagons, he notes. They speak of thunder without rain and horses painted for mourning, not for war. They say such acts mark the death of herds, not men. The burning of wagons, they claim, was an offering to still the anger of the plains. His description is calm, recorded without dramatization, but it replaces military cause with spiritual meaning. To the missionary, the incident was not an attack, but a symbol, an act of cleansing misread as hostility. A different tone appears in the claim of Marcus Hensley, a civilian freight contractor who filed for compensation in August 1865. His document sworn before a notary in Omaha reframes the event through commerce. I contracted with Fort Laramie to deliver goods to Deer Creek. The convoy rerouted south by officer's order due to poor terrain. I warned of raiders mixed tribes, not Sioux, operating near Sweetwater. Warning dismissed. The convoy was lost. My losses amount to $800 in freight and team. Hensley's words are neither fearful nor reverent. They are transactional, turning tragedy into evidence for reimbursement. His request was denied for lack of proof, but his testimony adds a new variable. The convoy may have taken a different route away from where official records placed it. That same month, a personal letter written by Lieutenant W. McClure to his wife adds another layer. Found decades later among family papers, its ink still visible, though the fold lines have cracked. There has been another loss west of here, he writes. No bodies, no horses, only the smell of fire. They call them painted riders. I have not seen them myself. Some say it was storm lightning that struck the train. Others whisper that the land itself revolted. I think only this, that we are guests here, and the host has grown weary. McClure's letter is private reflection, not report, but its tone of resignation mirrors the fatigue present in every official document of that summer. At Fort Halleck, south of the river, the daily logbook for June 19th records an observation that contradicts them all. Columns of smoke seen toward Platte Valley, believed to be controlled, burned by telegraph repair crew. No action taken. The writer, a duty clerk, made no connection between that distant haze and the missing convoy 2 days later. His entry captures the blind simultaneity of history events unfolding together, each unseen by the other. A year later, in 1806, a notebook belonging to an army surveyor resurfaced during a boundary expedition. Its pages contain a brief undated note: white clay circles found along old trail, not natural, possibly signs left by troops. No evidence of human remains. Local Arapaho refused to cross area. The handwriting is faint, almost erased by weather, but the words extend the mystery rather than resolving it. The land had kept its markings after the men had gone. Placed side by side, these fragments form a shifting geography of testimony. The Fort Kearny officer saw evidence of organized movement, but withheld judgment. The department commander labeled it hostility, then doubted his own definition. The missionary viewed it as ritual, the trader as negligence, the lieutenant as inevitability, the clerk as nothing of importance, the surveyor as trace. Each source closes its own circle of comprehension and leaves the rest untouched. In the telegram's, pigment is described as red over white. In the missionary's account, white over red. In the survivor's statement, painted men. In Crawford's memorandum, pigment residue. The order changes, the emphasis shifts, but the motif remains constant: color, silence, absence. Even the direction of the attack alters with the Teller Ridge River South Plain. Each document repeats the same skeleton of facts, but rearranges its muscles, giving the event new posture, new angle, new vocabulary. The contradictions deepen when weather records from Fort Laramie are compared. The log for June 17th lists wind from the west at 12 miles per hour, yet Keene's diary speaks of wind from the south, strong enough to scatter dust and ignite fire. If both are true, then the phenomenon extended across a wider field than previously assumed. The meteorological entry ends simply: skies clear, no precipitation. The same phrase appears in every adjacent outpost's weather sheet. The reports describe fire, but the sky, by every account, was cloudless. In August 1865, when the Department of the Platte compiled its summary of losses, the event received a final label: convoy destroyed by hostiles. Cause undetermined. The phrase became the closing punctuation of bureaucratic attention, repeated in ledgers through the following year. Yet by that time, the divergence between records had already become too wide to merge. The missionary's interpretation entered church bulletins as allegory. The civilian complaint sank into legal archives. The private letters remained folded in trunks. The telegraphs faded to near invisibility on their tissue paper surfaces. None refuted the others, none confirmed them. Each was written for a different reader: superior officer, superintendent, notary, family member, self. When the historian Dr. Whitford later assembled these materials, she observed that the contradictions themselves became the event. Each source seeks resolution, she wrote in her notes, but their disagreement constitutes the truth, a record not of what happened, but of how it was perceived. Her statement never entered publication, but remains penciled in the margins of her draft catalog, a rare admission of interpretation within an otherwise neutral file. Thus the record expands not by certainty, but by variance. From the precision of military dispatches to the speculation of observers, the archive grows into a polyphony of perspective, a field of words mirroring the plains themselves, vast and windswept, where every direction holds a different horizon. What began as a simple convoy report becomes a mosaic of half-verified realities, each piece reflecting a different temperature of the same summer. The army sought order, the missionaries sought meaning, the traders sought compensation, and the letters home sought reason, none found it. In the end, the discrepancies remain intact, forming a pattern that is itself a kind of evidence, a map of uncertainties etched in ink and delay. The documents do not agree yet, their very discord preserves what single truth could not: that the Great Plains in 1865 were a place where facts scattered like ash, and the act of recording was itself another form of loss. As months passed after the burning of the convoy, the paper trail around the Platte thickened into something more than confusion, a slow accumulation of follow-up correspondence, second-hand testimonies, and departmental summaries, each written to close a case that refused to end neatly. The earliest of these post-incident records comes from Captain William Crawford's second memorandum, dated August 3, 1865, marked Supplemental Report Platte Sector. Its language carries the fatigue of repetition, the tone of a man required to clarify what could not be clarified. Revisited site per directive from Department of the Platte, he writes, ground remains barren, vegetation not returned. Circular depressions consistent with horse movement still visible approximately 40 feet in diameter. Soil composition altered, fine ash to depth of 4 inches. No metallic fragments recovered except hinges from wagon box fused by heat. No signs of human interment. Beneath the typed lines, Crawford adds in ink, one fragment of harness discovered leather, blackened but intact, marked with initials SM. Possibly Myers, returned to Fort Laramie quartermaster. Attached to this memorandum is an enclosure and extract from the Department Inspector's Journal, written by Major Thomas L. Adair, who examined the remains later that month. Temperature moderate, no rain, he records. Investigated burned ground west of Platte Forks. Confirmed absence of skeletal remains. Conclude bodies likely consumed or removed. No tracks of burial visible. Circumference of burned area irregular, suggesting multiple ignition points. Adair refrains from theory, but notes one detail missing from earlier reports. Several stones arranged in spiral pattern near center of site. Possible natural formation, though, alignment unusual. In September 1865, Colonel Moonlight forwarded his final summary to the War Department. The document, titled Consolidated Report on Disruptions to Supply and Telegraph Lines, Second Quarter, 1865, lists the Platte incident as one among 7 disruptions. Yet his paragraph on the event extends longer than any other. The loss of the Laramie convoy remains without satisfactory explanation. Investigation indicates no theft of material, no evidence of capture, and no repeat activity in the vicinity. The attack appears singular in nature. Weather and terrain prevent definitive conclusions. The final sentence reads, recommend closure of inquiry to preserve operational efficiency. That same month in Washington, a clerk in the Adjutant General's office entered the following notation into the Consolidated Ledger: Incident Platte River, June 17, 1865, closed. The word closed is underlined twice. Yet letters continued to arrive at the department through the autumn. One dated October 14th from Lieutenant Samuel Givens, now stationed at Fort Sedgwick, reopens the subject unwillingly. Requests permission to clarify prior statements regarding the attack, he writes. It has come to my attention that surviving men from the Deer Creek line encountered painted horsemen several miles west of original site. Their description consistent with previous appearance, white upon red, no flag. They did not engage the riders, passed without incident. I offer this only for completeness. The notation received appears below the signature. No further response was issued. The following year, an internal memorandum from the Army Engineering Corps mentions the same location during telegraph reconstruction. Work crews report persistent difficulty establishing pole foundations near old burn site. Soil friable, lacking cohesion. Horses refuse to cross central ground. Workers report faint odor of ash when soil disturbed. Recommend bypass by 2 miles north. The entry is unsigned but stamped approved. Department Engineer. The same month, a local freight operator, Edward Loomis, submitted a civilian notice to the Rocky Mountain Herald. The ground at Platte Crossing remains poisoned to crops. No grass grows where the wagons burned. Travelers avoid it. The place is called the Circle Field by those who pass. In March 1867, 2 years after the original destruction, Major Adair filed a personal letter to his superior, later archived in the Army Correspondence Index. His tone is restrained but precise. On route inspection west of Laramie, I again observed the ground previously recorded as site of 1865 incident. The pattern of circular depressions persists though softened by erosion. Noted fragments of iron distributed beyond original perimeter, indicating explosive dispersion. Suggest combustion from stored material powder barrels? Lack of residue contradicts this. I conclude ignition may have occurred from below, rather than surface cause unknown. A more human note appears in an undated deposition collected during a veteran's pension hearing decades later. The testimony belongs to Private Henry Bell, then an aging former scout recalling his participation in a search party after the attack. His statement, written in 1892 and preserved among pension files, reads, "I went out with Captain Crawford after the wagons were gone. We found tracks of heavy wheels turning off from the main road, like they had tried to leave it. The tracks ended at the burned place. I found one shoe from a mule, no bones. The earth there was soft and gray. When you stepped, it sunk and gave no dust, just settled. The captain told me not to speak of it after we returned. I have not till now." Another fragment comes from a ledger of the U.S. Army Quartermaster's Office inventory of recovered materials, Western Sector, 1865 to 18. Entry number 171 reads, 2 metal buckets, 1 brass compass, portions of burned canvas recovered from Platte site. Contents beyond identification, value negligible. The inventory contains no commentary, but its existence proves a return mission long after the incident's official closure. By 1868, references to the site appear sporadically in travel correspondence. A letter printed in the Nebraska Pioneer describes a field where grass will not grow and wheels sink though the ground looks dry. Another, written by Telegraph Supervisor John Winslow, refers to the old circle by the river, remarking that lightning strikes were frequent there and equipment often failed. His closing line, "We have moved the poles north to avoid it." Through these scattered continuations, the archive deepens not in explanation, but in duration. The event, once confined to a single day in June, extends through reports and re-encounters across several years, each document marking the persistence of the place long after the Army declared it finished. The rhythm of record-keeping itself becomes evidence of how the incident refused erasure. A surviving department summary from late 1869 Miscellaneous Frontier Losses repeats the phrase first used by Colonel Moonlight, convoy, destroyed by hostiles, cause undetermined. Yet below the printed line in handwriting by an unknown clerk appears an alternate phrase, possibly not hostile. The ink fades at the edge of the page, the handwriting untraced. The later records show a pattern of omission rather than denial. Reports of similar disruptions between 1806 and 1868 are cataloged without mention of pigments riders or unclaimed cargo. The descriptors shift supply interruption, trail obstruction, unidentified interference. The official narrative adapts through subtraction, replacing the anomaly with terminology manageable within procedure. What could not be explained was reduced to category and filed away. Across these later layers, the same geography repeats: the forks of the Platte, the ridge to the north, the low river ground where the wagons once stood. Each subsequent officer who passed through marked it again on his map, often using the same language: burned field, circle ground, old convoy site. The consistency of place stands against the inconsistency of explanation. Even decades later, government survey maps still carried a faint dotted outline labeled Abandoned Road and Camp, 1865. By then, the telegraph line had shifted north, the forts were decommissioned, and settlement had erased most traces of the original route. Yet the cartographic ghost of the event lingered not as memory, but as measurement. Every document in this later phase shares one characteristic: restraint. Crawford's supplemental report observes without speculation. Adair's inspection quantifies but refuses conclusion. Gibbons's follow-up letter reports sighting but denies assumption. Bell's deposition adds recollection, yet omits interpretation. Each voice contributes data distances, soil depth, object count, temperature, the tangible language of empiricism. Together they accumulate not into story, but into density, a factual gravity that draws the reader inward. Through their repetition, a pattern emerges that the documents themselves do not name an area where visibility ends, where procedure cannot proceed further. In this way, the archive becomes its own map of absence coordinates, fixed variables, unresolved. The event known as "When the Painted Riders Struck Back" does not expand through myth or rumor, but through the very precision of its surviving paperwork. Each measurement reinforces the void it seeks to close, every detail tracing the perimeter of what remains unknown. By the end of 1869, the correspondence stops. The final mention appears in a logistical overview filed by the Department Quartermaster Supplies, transported without incident. Previous disruptions no longer present. The phrase marks the bureaucratic end of the trail. Yet within the archive, the traces continue, ink fading, paper yellowing, edges fragile. Each page a layer of endurance, proof that even the most procedural of languages can preserve what it cannot explain. The final layer of the Platte River incident file unfolds with the calm precision of closure that never arrives. The handwriting grows thinner, the margins wider, as if the writers themselves sense the archive nearing its end. Each entry, each memo carries less narrative and more vacancy, the shape of a record built around what could not be continued. The first of these last fragments belongs to Lieutenant Samuel R. Givens, filed from Fort Sedgwick, months after his reassignment. The page is dated November 4th, 1865, written on standard Army ledger paper. Weather cold, wind east, trail clear of frost. Routine inspection of supply depots complete. The following lines read, "No renewed incidents reported. Men settled though uneasy. I still find myself marking the horizon at dusk." Below the typed portion, a note in pencil. "I have closed the Platte book." That is the final sentence in his hand. 2 weeks later, the same handwriting reappears, but in the margin of another officer's report, not his own. Captain William Crawford, compiling a closing memorandum for the department, wrote, "As of this date, no further disturbance is noted along the Platte corridor." Beneath it, in a different hand, clearly Givens, "until they return." There is no signature. The page ends abruptly, mid-space, followed by a blank sheet stamped, "Filed." The remaining material from late 1865 transitions from direct witness to administrative residue. A departmental abstract summarizing all frontier disruptions lists the Platte entry at item number 21. Next to outcome, the clerk wrote, "Resolved." In the margin, another mark appears, a short dash drawn later in graphite. No name, no explanation. In January 1806, the Department of the Platte issued a closing circular, "No further patrols necessary west of Laramie. Focus resources on Powder River." Attached is a folded memorandum signed by Colonel Henry Moonlight, in which one paragraph stands apart. "The matter of the burned convoy shall remain recorded as concluded. No purpose served by further inquiry. The loss cannot be redeemed." That phrase, "the loss cannot be redeemed," is underlined twice. It would become the last official judgment attached to the file. Then, after nearly a year of silence, another document surfaces. It is undated, but filed sequentially after the closure order. Its title, "Post-Inquiry Field Observation, Unassigned Author." The handwriting is slanted and unfamiliar, likely from a lower-ranking officer or clerk. The first line, "Visited old wagon route by accident during mapping survey. Area unchanged. Ground brittle and ashen. No vegetation. Discovered fragment of wheel rim near shallow depression. Diameter matches wagon type used in 1865. The note continues, "Uneven indentation in earth, approximately the size of man's torso. Depth 1 foot. No bones or metal. Possible collapsed cavity." The final sentence reads, "Wind moves ash in circle. Nothing else moves. No initials follow." In the following months, brief annotations reappear across unrelated documents. A field requisition form with the words, "Platte Circle, still barren, a telegraph installation report," noting equipment failure at coordinates identical to 1865 site. A supply invoice referencing detour via old wagon field. None elaborate. The incident lingers as a geographic reference stripped of narrative, reduced to a coordinate that resists closure. In April 1806, the handwriting of Major Thomas Adair enters the archive one last time. His inspection log, numbered number 198, contains an entry only 3 lines long. "Road past location formerly marked on Laramie maps as burned ground. Ash dispersed. Only faint ring visible under frost. Men refuse to halt horses." Beneath this, he signs his name, the last known signature tied to the investigation. The rest of the page remains blank. After that, the documents become increasingly impersonal. Printed ledgers, requisition numbers, pay rosters. Yet inside one of those mechanical forms filed under expenditures for abandoned lines lies a single handwritten addition in faint ink. "The ground west of the Platte remains unfit." The phrase occupies a column intended for costs, but no figure accompanies it. By 1867, no new pages were added. The Platte River incident file, as it exists today, ends with an envelope. On its front, typed in block letters, is the instruction, "To be filed with miscellaneous correspondence. No further action." Inside rests the last surviving document attributed to the event, a torn half-page marked extract from Communication Log, Fort Laramie, October 1806. The Telegraph transcript reads, "To Dept. Of the Platte confirmed completion of road survey, line passes former convoy site without interference. Weather clear, no visible remains. Found one iron stake upright in earth, no markings, left in place. Lieutenant Givens unsigned copy. There is no response telegram in return. No follow-up notation. This is where the chronological record stops. After that point, the story of the file becomes archival history preservation rather than participation. The ledger containing Givens's final notes was boxed and stored with unrelated quartermaster receipts. When rediscovered in 1958, the final pages were brittle, the ink nearly invisible. Under ultraviolet light, curators identified 2 faint lines never typed into any earlier transcript. On the last page, lower corner in Givens's faded handwriting, the words, "The wind still turns there, nothing more." That sentence marks the true terminus of the Platte River incident file. No signatures follow, no subsequent correspondence acknowledges it. The War Department indexes after 1806 make no mention of the event nor of Givens himself. His name disappears from Army payroll after 1868. There is no record of resignation, no death notice, no pension. Only the surviving documents whose final entry is that half-visible line written in the margins of a book thought lost. The archival reconstruction performed by Dr. Ellen Whitford nearly a century later lists this moment as the file's terminal point. Her footnote reads, "All remaining pages blank." Beneath that, another line perhaps added by a different hand, "End of recorded material." The climax arrives not in discovery, but in cessation, a kind of symmetry between what was burned and what was written. The documents narrow, their sentences shorten, and their ink fades until there is nothing left to describe. The event collapses into its record, and the record collapses into its final mark. No final theory, no concluding paragraph, no closure, only the echo of unfinished handwriting preserved between 2 sheets of brittle paper. The silence that follows is not absence but residue, the trace of a record that exhausted its own language. Where earlier entries measured distances now, there are none. Where they counted wagons, there are no numbers left to write. The military grammar of precision reaches its limit and stops. The file ends because nothing more could be said within its format. In the storage inventory prepared in 1939, a clerk cataloged the file as Incident Report, Unresolved, Platte Sector, 1865. He added a short description for reference, contains fragments of field logs, letters, and memoranda. No conclusive summary. When archivists microfilmed the document in 1964, the final frame of the reel captured the last visible line, that fading sentence by Givens, before the screen turned black. For the historians who later examined it, this sudden termination became its most eloquent moment. The rhythm of bureaucracy after years of repetition simply stops. The last sheet holds nothing but the suggestion of movement, the wind, the ring of ash, the absence of reply. Every investigation leads to the same ending, a blank space once filled by ink. Every page closes with a period that feels unfinished. And so, when the narration of this archive reaches its own final point, it mirrors the documents, it recounts. The words diminish, the details dissolve, until what remains is only the factual outline of loss. The wagon's gone, the ground barren, the ledger closed, the handwriting of the last witness fading into paper too fragile to touch. Nothing replaces it. No addendum was ever added, no statement ever corrected it. The Platte River incident file ends exactly where the event did, in the absence of explanation, the stillness of completion by disappearance. Its silence has become its evidence, its emptiness, its proof. The final recorded line in the entire archive, stamped on a small index slip filed with the box in 1959, reads, "No additional documents located." Then, below a dash, not punctuation, but continuation cut short. It is the last stroke of ink tied to the Great Plains of 1865. After that, there are no more words. The story of the Platte River incident file does not end in the 19th century. It survives as a sequence of objects, a ledger, a diary, a memorandum, a medical log dispersed across decades and rediscovered by accident. What began as military paperwork became over time a landscape of fragments. Each fragment passed through its own era of neglect and recovery, carried forward by clerks, archivists, and historians who often did not realize they were preserving the same story. The first rediscovery occurred in 1958 inside a storage vault at the National Archives facility in St. Louis. The researcher was Dr. Ellen H. Whitford, a historian compiling telegraph construction records for a study on post-Civil War communications. Among the crates labeled supplies and contracts, 1864-1866, she found one wooden box water-stained, its label partly burned. Inside lay the field log of Lieutenant Samuel R. Givens, folded among telegraph invoices and quartermaster receipts. The cover bore his name faintly embossed, and inside the first page a heading, Daily Record, Platte Sector Operations. Whitford realized immediately that it was not a technical ledger, but a field diary. The handwriting, faded to brown, still legible under angled light, contained the first known mention of painted riders and military correspondence. She sent a short note to her supervisor describing a misfiled operations log related to an unrecorded supply loss. That note began the modern reconstruction of the file. Within months, cross-referencing led Whitford to other fragments, telegrams stored on microfilm at the Department of the Army's Signal Corps archive, a burned page of Crawford's report in the Quartermaster Record Group, and a set of medical entries from Fort Laramie found in the Surgeon General's office files. Piece by piece, the pattern reassembled. None of the institutions were aware the others held connected material. Each document had survived by coincidence: Givens's ledger misclassified as telegraph supply, Crawford's memorandum bound among engineering plans, Lang's medical notes preserved only because they were copied into hospital statistics, and Keene's diary saved in a family chest in Ohio. In 1961, Whitford published her preliminary findings in the Midwestern Historical Review under the title Administrative Ghosts and Unresolved Frontier File. The article drew limited attention. It lacked the drama of battle history, relying instead on transcripts of routine paperwork. Yet for historians of the Great Plains, it offered a rare glimpse into the machinery of 19th century record-keeping, how an event could vanish, not through conspiracy or erasure, but through classification. Her conclusion was cautious. The silence of the file is the silence of its form. The event could not be expressed within the language designed to contain it. That sentence would later appear engraved on a museum plaque. Over the next decade, fragments continued to surface. In 1964, the Army Corps of Engineers discovered a bound notebook titled Topographical Field Notes 18C, which contained a one-page reference to unexplainable soil discoloration along former supply route west of Platte. In 1975, a graduate student researching Western telegraph lines identified the long-lost Crawford memorandum, misfiled in an engineering portfolio at Fort Leavenworth. 2 years later, Whitford's assistant located the original Keene diary at the Ohio Historical Society, donated by a descendant who had never opened the box in which it was stored. Each rediscovery expanded the edges of the story, but never filled its center. When the National Archives digitized the records in 1982, technicians discovered that the ink on Givens' final page, invisible to the naked eye, fluoresced faintly under ultraviolet light. Those faint lines contained his last words. "The wind still turns there." The phrase became the title of a symposium held in 1984 on unresolved events in frontier documentation, where historians debated whether Givens's note was literal, metaphorical, or procedural. No consensus emerged. Today, the Platte River Incident File is preserved as Record Group 94, Box 402B in the Military Records Division of the National Archives. Its contents occupy less than 2 inches of shelf space. Within that small span of paper resides every surviving trace of the event: 4 original documents, 5 partial copies, 1 microfilm reel, and Whitford's typed transcript. The Givens ledger remains sealed in temperature-controlled storage. Its binding reinforced its pages, digitized but not accessible for public handling. The Keene diary rests in Columbus, Ohio, under the reference code OHS-WD 1965-37. The Crawford Memorandum is held at Fort Leavenworth, while the medical log exists as microfilm at the National Library of Medicine. None of these materials have ever been displayed together. The geography of their preservation mirrors the geography of their origin, scattered, distant, united only by reference. St. Louis, Columbus, Leavenworth, Bethesda, each holding a corner of the same frontier. When researchers trace their path, the physical map of archives reconstructs the same corridor once crossed by wagons from the Missouri River to the high plains near present-day Wyoming. What remains of the convoy exists now only as catalog numbers, storage codes, and digital facsimiles that flicker briefly on screen before fading again into institutional quiet. What continues to elude historians is the question of why the event occurred at all. Military analysts cite logistical confusion, a miscommunication of routes, a powder explosion mistaken for attack. Anthropologists suggest cultural misreading, a ceremonial act of warning by displaced tribes misinterpreted as aggression. Environmental historians focus on the material evidence, the fused metal, the barren soil, the pattern of circular depressions that persisted for decades. None provide closure. The soil at the site tested in '94 still shows trace magnetization inconsistent with natural fire. Aerial photography reveals no structural remains, yet faint discolorations in vegetation form the outline of the original wagon circle. Even in the 21st century, the terrain refuses neutrality. The archivists who manage the file approach it not as mystery, but as document a record whose value lies in its endurance. Every 50 years, as part of routine preservation, the papers are removed from their box, checked for acidity, refolded, and returned to the shelf. The process repeats like ritual, reaffirming the distance between what is known and what survives. The ledger that once traveled by wagon now rests inside a sealed room under controlled humidity, its ink fading a little more each decade. The diary remains unopened to protect its binding. The microfilm copies once new technology now deteriorate in their plastic reels. The archive, like the plains it describes, continues to erode quietly under its own weight of time. The men whose names fill its pages left no descendants in the record. Gibbons disappears from official rosters after 1868. Crawford dies in 1873 in Missouri. His obituary lists him only as veteran of the Western campaigns. The physician Lang transfers east and vanishes from the Surgeon General's index. Keene's family preserved his diary but never annotated it. None of them spoke publicly about the event again. Their silence became part of the record itself. The site where the wagons burned is now private ranch land near Glen Rock, Wyoming. Visitors driving along the modern highway pass within a mile of where the circle field once stood, unaware that the grass beneath them hides the coordinates of one of the least understood military losses of the frontier. No marker identifies it. The land has returned to ordinary use, its history buried under decades of cultivation. Only the archival references preserve the location, a grid coordinate on an 1872 survey map, cross-indexed with the telegraph line that once ran nearby. To the historian, the value of the file lies not in the mystery it holds, but in what it reveals about how institutions remember, how events are absorbed, reduced, or forgotten through the structure of paperwork. The Platte River incident file stands as a record of language meeting its own limit. The officers wrote within the discipline of their time, no speculation, no emotion, no reflection, yet their restraint produced a silence that still vibrates through every page. What remains is neither legend nor certainty, but the slow persistence of ink over time. Dr. Whitford retired in 1979, leaving her compiled notes to the National Archives. Her last annotation, written in blue pen on the inside cover of the catalog, reads, "All documents consulted, none conclusive. The file remains incomplete by nature." Her handwriting ends there, much like Gibbons's trailing into space. Decades later, researchers quote her line as if it were the conclusion of a larger narrative, but it is not conclusion. It is the recognition that history often stops without finishing. Today, scholars revisit the Platte River incident less for answers than for method, as a study in how silence transmits through documentation, how the failure of language becomes evidence of its own. They speak of it in conferences as a case of archival entropy, a moment where the process of record-keeping exposes the very limits of what can be known. Each reader, each analyst stands at the same threshold where Gibbons once stood, the ridge overlooking the burned horizon, recording what he could, aware that the rest would fall away. In the end, the Platte River incident file endures not because of what it contains, but because of what it cannot. Its preservation across centuries transforms absence into artifact, the tangible remains of uncertainty. The silence it holds is not emptiness, but evidence of continuity, the same wind moving through paper that once moved through grass. And so, as the camera of scholarship turns away from the file, the voice of history remains steady, neutral, unadorned. The past does not close, it settles. The paper holds its form. The ink continues to fade, the questions remain open. The story stands not as proof or myth, but as endurance, a document that survived its own forgetting. What began as a field log in the summer of 1865 now rests as a trace within the architecture of memory, an unfinished record still breathing between pages. And in that persistence, history reminds us that silence is not the end of truth, but its beginning, a quiet invitation to keep listening. Every document stops before the truth appears, every witness writes until the page ends. But history keeps whispering between the lines. What do you hear in that silence? Comment below. Your interpretation becomes part of the record. Somewhere along the Platte River in 1865, an entire convoy vanished without a trace. No battle, no survivors, no explanation. Before we begin, what do you think erased them from the record? Fire, silence, or something history refused to name? Leave your thought below. I'll be reading every theory,